Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Rotoballer Radio Waiver Wire Series. I'm your host, Anthony Aniano. Happy to be with you here as we take a look at the waiver wire for Week 11 of your fantasy football season. Folks, don't forget, head over to rotoballer.com right now and check out everything we have there. The main page, the premium passes, the expert chats, Slack chats, whatever it is, rotoballer.com has you covered. Football, baseball, basketball, MMA, esports, PGA, NASCAR, sports betting, rotoballer.com, whether it's DFS or season-long formats. Sign up for any of those premium passes right now using the promo code ACES and save yourself an additional 10% at checkout. All right, guys, so 10 weeks in the book, Week 11, fantasy playoffs slowly approaching as we jostle for positioning there in our fantasy playoffs. Hopefully your season still going well. Week 10 had a couple of injuries. Baker Mayfield, a contusion on the knee. They said he could have returned, but he didn't as that game was out of hand. Aaron Jones looks like the big injury. He comes out. A.J. Dillon goes on to have 2 touchdowns. You know, hopefully you've been smart. And if you've had Aaron Jones, you've figured out a way to get A.J. Dillon on your team if he's going to be out for some time. And A.J. Dillon just slides in, right? I don't even hesitate. He goes top 12 running back for me rest of season. Does A.J. Dillon. We know Robert Woods was out now with the ACL. Dallas Goedert left the game with a concussion. Damian Harris was out. Kyler Murray still out. DeAndre Hopkins still out. And then in Week 11, we have 2 teams on a bye. The Denver Broncos. So you miss Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Noah Fant, and the running backs Javonte Williams and Mel Gordon. And the Rams offense on a bye. That's a tough one. No Stafford, Henderson, Cooper Kupp, the biggest hit there. And then Odell Beckham Jr. and Van Jefferson, who hopefully you didn't drop after the Odell Beckham signing with the Rams, now that he maintains his role. And I actually view Van Jefferson as the wide receiver 2 right now for the Rams potentially going forward until Odell Beckham gets a few games under his belt in that Rams system. So let's go around here. We'll start at the quarterback position here. My number 1 quarterback ad for Week 11. If you're looking for a quarterback for whatever reason, whether it be ineffectiveness or injury, maybe you're looking up to make up for Matt Stafford. That would be the big thing. Mac Jones of the New England Patriots. He's been the best of the rookies. There's no doubt about it. And he has a big game. He had a big game this past week against Cleveland. 28% rostered, as you know. I always use Yahoo as my roster percentages. 28% for Mac Jones. He goes 19 for 23, 198 yards, and 3 more touchdowns. That New England offense looked fantastic. Did not miss a beat without Damian Harris. Hunter Henry continues to excel. Ramondre Stevenson, who we'll talk about in a bit, had a nice game. Kendrick Bourne, who didn't make my top 4 wide receivers, but he was involved. Jacoby Myers caught a late touchdown. Mac Jones looked great. 25.9 fantasy points. And the reason he's number 1 is that matchup next week, Week 11, against the Atlanta Falcons, where Dak Prescott just carved up that Falcon defense. At number 2 is Tua Tagovailoa. Now listen, he played Thursday night off the bench for Jacoby Brissett. Made no sense, right? If he wasn't healthy enough to start, then why was he healthy enough to come off the bench? But he came off the bench and played well. 8 of 13, 158, ran for a touchdown. He's only 23% rostered. Finished with 12.3 fantasy points, but I've talked about him on the show in the past. He had those back-to-back 30-point games and another terrific matchup. Let's just be honest about this. This New York Jets defense cannot stop anybody now. 30 points seems to be the minimum of what other teams are scoring on them. Josh Allen had a field day. Tua, with his wide receiver core, Jalen Waddle, Mike Gesicki, Myles Gaskin, they shouldn't have any problem moving the ball on the Jets defense. So he's my 2nd quarterback. At number 3, got to pay attention now to Cam Newton in Carolina. P.J. Walker did the job. Arizona's offense, the turnovers really helped Carolina more than anything. A healthy Christian McCaffrey catching the ball out of the backfield sure helped a ton. Robbie Anderson got involved again. But Cam Newton's coming. This is not P.J. Walker's job for long. It's going to be Cam Newton's. And you saw Cam Newton, in just a matter of days, was already the goal line quarterback. Threw the ball 3 times, 3 completions on 4 attempts, 8 yards, threw the touchdown, ran for a touchdown, 3 carries, 14 and a touch. Listen, even if he just gets that goal line work, okay, and we know his accuracy is an issue. He can't throw the deep ball like he does, but he looked good on that short out to Robbie Anderson. He ran the ball in without much difficulty. He's excited to be back in Carolina, it sure seems like. Finished with 13, almost 14 fantasy points at very limited action. Nice matchup against the Washington football team that just potentially lost Chase Young to an ACL injury. They already lost their other defensive end in Montez Sweat due to a fractured jaw a couple of weeks ago. So the Washington pass rush taking a big hit. Cam Newton in line. And 2 QB leagues must own. If you're desperate, you don't want to overbid for a Mac Jones. Cam Newton should be the starter next week, week 11, for the Carolina Panthers. And finally, number 4, Trevor Siemian. He's the desperation play. Only 4% rostered, but he's holding off Taysom Hill. There's no denying that. 19 of 34, 298, 2 touchdowns. He's got 5 touchdowns in 3 games. Does Trevor Siemian. He did that without Alvin Kamara. 23.9 fantasy points on the road, though, against Philadelphia is a little tricky. Also be mindful of Jimmy Garoppolo next week. Nice matchup against the Jaguars defense. My only concern with Garoppolo is always when does Trey Lance reemerge for the 49ers offense. All right, so the quarterbacks, Mac Jones 1, 2 of 2, Cam Newton 3, Trevor Siemian actually number 4 if you're really desperate, 2 QB leagues for a quarterback. At the running back position, it's obvious who the number 1 is. I've talked about him over and over again, and that's Ramondre Stevenson. I've said all season he needs to be on rosters. He's too talented. Damian Harris held him off by playing well. No Damian Harris. Stevenson comes in and looks fantastic. 5 yards a carry, 20 for 100, 2 touchdowns. Can catch the ball out of the backfield on 5 targets, 4 receptions for 14 yards. 30% roster. Now, be mindful of this. The Patriots are playing the Falcons Thursday night. He could very well get another start if Damian Harris does not get cleared by maybe Wednesday. Okay, so Ramondre Stevenson could be in line for another heavy workload against the Falcons. Zeke Elliott went for 2 touchdowns against them on Sunday. Okay, that Falcons defense just played god-awful. So Ramondre Stevenson, by far and away, not only the number 1 ad at running back, but in my opinion, the number 1 ad overall. And still shockingly, only 30% rostered. At number 2 at running back, Deonta Foreman of the Tennessee Titans. Guys, 2 weeks in a row now, Deonta Foreman has led the Tennessee Titans in carries, not Adrian Peterson. Okay, I'm just going by the numbers here. Okay, Deonta Foreman, it wasn't fantastic. It was 11 carries for 30 yards. But Adrian Peterson, he went 8 for 21. He didn't do much either. Okay, Foreman, 2 catches on 2 targets, 48 yards. Tennessee continues to win without Julio Jones and Derrick Henry. Okay, 9.8 fantasy points for Deonta Foreman, and a nice matchup against that Houston Texans defense, week 11. At number 3, I've mentioned this player in the past as well, Ty Johnson, a PPR darling. Standard league, no real value. But 8 targets for the Jets as they go back to the quarterback misery. Mike White looks terrible. Okay, hopefully Zach Wilson gets healthy. Otherwise, potentially looking at Joe Flacco in week 11 against the Miami Dolphins. My advice, line up that Dolphins defense against the Jets offense next week. Nonetheless, Ty Johnson, PPR format, PPR him to death type of player. 5 catches, 36 yards. The 8 targets are what stood out to me. And number 4, the desperation running back, Wayne Gallman of the Atlanta Falcons, reemerges from a lot of DNPs. Not even rostered really anywhere on Yahoo. But he does get 15 carries, so that volume does bring him a little bit of notice. 55 yards, 21 yards receiving on 1 reception, 8.6. I don't love the matchup. That New England defense playing very well, but that's the desperation ad at running back. It's Stevenson, Deonta Foreman, Ty Johnson, PPR formats, and then Wayne Gallman at number 4. At the wide receiver position, 4 wide receivers who had some interesting weeks. My number 1 wide receiver ad, Jamal Agnew of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And this is interesting because I'm saying a wide receiver is the number 1 ad, and the guy did not have a reception. Okay, 5 targets, no catches. However, he ran 3 for 79 and a touchdown, the touchdown being a 66-yarder. Bottom line is Jamal Agnew right now is making plays just about every single week for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's doing more than Shenault. He's doing more than Marvin Jones. He's doing more than when DJ Chark got hurt, before DJ Chark got hurt. He and James Robinson are the best offensive pieces right now for the Jacksonville Jaguars. 4 of his last 5 games, Jamal Agnew has 10 or more fantasy points. In his last 5 games, he has 35 targets, 7 targets per game. Agnew is involved. There's no denying it. He's my number one wide receiver add. And he only sits right now at 9% rostered. Jaguars in for a tough matchup next week against the 49ers. My number 2 wide receiver, DeAndre Carter of the Washington football team, who now 2 weeks in a row has put up essentially identical numbers worthy of being mentioned. Okay, 1% rostered on Yahoo. This week, 3 receptions on 6 targets, 56 yards, and a touchdown. Week 8, they had the bye week 9, so 2 weeks ago, week 8, 3 receptions on 6 targets, 51 yards, and a touchdown. 15 fantasy points in week 10, 14.1 in week 8. It's 2 weeks in a row where you got to be mindful of him. Gets in the end zone in both games. Tyler Heineke looks for him. McLaurin's still the number 1 there on the road against the Carolina Panthers. Wide receiver 3 emerges out of nowhere. Pittsburgh Steelers kick returner who now seizes an opportunity with Chase Claypool out, and that's Ray McLeod III for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Another low rostership, 0%. 9 for 63, that's 15.3 fantasy points as Pittsburgh faces the Chargers next week. But he goes 9 for 63 in the tie against the Detroit Lions. Okay, 12 targets. I can't ignore 12 targets. That's just a tremendous value. Mason Rudolph looking for him all game long. And if he emerges as the wide receiver 2 opposite Deontay Johnson, while Chase Claypool remains out for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And number 4, another injury replacement taking advantage of an opportunity. Marcus Johnson in Tennessee. Different players emerging every week right now for Tennessee. A.J. Brown was a non-factor. Deontay Foreman got some carries. Marcus Johnson was the leading receiver for the Tennessee Titans in their victory over the Saints, especially now with Julio Jones on IR. Marcus Johnson, another 0% rostership, okay? 5 for 100 on 6 targets. He led the team in targets and receptions in Week 10 as Tennessee transitions to a more pass-happy, pass-friendly offense in the absence of Derrick Henry. Number 1, Jamal Agnew, 9%. Number 2, DeAndre Carter, 1%. Number 3, Ray McLeod, 0. And then Marcus Johnson, also another 0% rostership for the 4 wide receivers to keep an eye on in Week 11. And finally, at the tight end position, a couple of players stood out. I've mentioned Dan Arnold. He remains my number 1 tight end there. Folks, we're sleeping on Dan Arnold. That is still only 26% rostered on Yahoo. 24 targets in his last 3 games. 10 or more fantasy points in his last 3 games. He goes 5 for 67 on 7 targets. Gets a 2-point conversion. 13.7 fantasy points for the Jaguars tight end. He is by far the number 1 tight end ad of the week. Tyler Conklin is number 2. He has the 2 touchdowns for the Minnesota Vikings. Doesn't see the volume that Dan Arnold does. Only 3 catches for 11 yards. But like we said, 2 of those in the end zone on 5 targets. Goes against Green Bay, who did give up points to Gerald Everett at the tight end position in Week 10. Tyler Conklin, 3 of his last 4 games, 10 or more fantasy points, and 22 targets in his last 4. At number 3 is Austin Hooper. He was the favorite of Cleveland's Case Keenum, Baker Mayfield, before he got hurt. 4 for 25 and a touchdown. 12.5 fantasy points. I do like the matchup against Detroit, but keep in mind Njoku's also there as well. And I mentioned Gerald Everett. He is my desperation ad at tight end who's done nothing. He's really done nothing all year, but emerged in Week 10 for Seattle as they struggled offensively, 20% rostered. He goes 8 for 63 on 8 targets, 14.3 fantasy points. Okay, everybody. So in a quick recap, at the tight end position, Dan Arnold, Tyler Conklin, Austin Hooper, and then Gerald Everett. At wide receiver, Jamal Agnew, DeAndre Carter, Ray McLeod, and Marcus Johnson. At the running back position, my number 1 overall ad of the week is Ramondre Stevenson, followed by Deontay Foreman, Ty Johnson of the Jets, and then Wayne Gallman. And at quarterback, Mac Jones, Tua Tagovailoa, Cam Newton, and then Trevor Siemian. All right, everybody. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter at @Aniano Fantasy. Hit the like and subscribe button right here to the Rotoballer YouTube channel. And make sure you continue listening to all the great Rotoballer Radio content here on YouTube or wherever you listen to the Rotoballer Radio podcasts. All right? Stay smart, stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one, folks.